Okay, so you want to own a lighthouse, not photograph one, not visit one on vacation, own it. Your name on the deed, 100-foot tower with your furniture in it. Waves doing what waves do, while you watch from the one room in America, legally allowed to have a lamp, visible 20 miles out at sea. It feels like the last honest form of real estate left. A government-built monument nobody else wants, sitting there for whoever's willing to take it off the country's hands. Here's the number that should stop you. Since 2000, the United States government has moved more than 150 lighthouses out of federal ownership, and this month, it's trying to give away the single oldest one in the country, a 310-year-old tower guarding the entrance to Boston Harbor, to whichever nonprofit or local government will take care of it for free. Lighthouses aren't rare. The government has been trying to get rid of them for a quarter century. Here's what actually happens instead. You've pictured buying a piece of maritime history and walking away with the whole thing, the tower, the beam, all of it. What you actually get is smaller than that. Even after your name is on the deed, the Coast Guard keeps a permanent legal right to walk into your building whenever it wants, forever, to service the one piece of equipment that made the tower worth building. One buyer paid $933,888 at federal auction for a lighthouse in Boston Harbor, and is by the end of this video still not finished paying for it more than a decade later. By the time you understand what you're actually applying for, owning a lighthouse stops looking like real estate and starts looking like adopting the government's oldest, wettest infrastructure problem. Start with who the government actually wants to hand these to, because it isn't you, not at first. The law governing this is the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, passed in 2000, and it sets up a strict pecking order. First priority, federal agencies, state and local governments, and nonprofit or educational organizations get first crack at any lighthouse the Coast Guard no longer needs for free. The catch is, free comes with conditions. GSA issues a notice of availability, and the applicant has to prove two things to the National Park Service: that it's financially able to maintain a historic light station, and that it will open the property to the public for education, recreation, or historic preservation purposes. Prove that, and the tower is yours for $1. Only if nobody qualifies does a lighthouse go to public auction, where private citizens finally get to bid, and here's the part worth noticing. At the free tier, you prove you can afford the upkeep before anyone hands you the keys. At the auction tier, that requirement disappears. You register at Real Estate Sales, Gov, pass an identity check, put down a refundable deposit, $10,000 on a recent New England auction, bidding in $10,000 increments, and pay all cash, since the government offers no financing. Nobody checks whether you can maintain a 100-year-old tower in open ocean. They check whether your identity is real and your deposit clears. Since the program started, more than 150 lighthouses have changed hands, 81 given away free, and around 70 sold at auction, raising just over $10 million total for the Coast Guard's Aids to Navigation budget. Run that math, 70 lighthouses, $10 million, roughly $140,000 apiece, for structures the government spent, in some cases over a century, building and maintaining. That average price says less about what these towers are worth than about how badly the government wants the maintenance bill off its own books. The sticker price on a lighthouse is the first number that lies to you. Auction results since the program began have ranged from $10,000 up to a record $933,888. Graves Light in Boston Harbor, which opened at just $26,000 in 2013 before two bidders drove it up. That's the range you'll see advertised, a real shot at federal history for less than the price of a used car. The Middle Ground Lighthouse in the Chesapeake Bay sold for $31,000 back in 2005. After a full restoration, it went back on the market in 2026, listed at $995,000, over 30 times what its owner paid 21 years earlier. That jump is the whole story, because almost none of it is the land or the tower, it's the restoration sitting in between those two numbers. Contractors who specialize in this work put a bare, non-functional beacon retrofit around $80,000 to $150,000. A full historic restoration with real structural and electrical work climbs toward $500,000 or more. A tall, fully automated tower restoration with remote monitoring, what the largest lighthouses actually need, runs contractor estimates of $2 million to $3,800,000. Those are third-party estimates, not government figures, but the shape holds. The auction price is a rounding error next to making the thing livable, and upkeep on top of that runs another 1 to 4% of restoration cost every year indefinitely. And the government isn't selling you a fixer-upper with a home inspection attached. Every auction is sold as is and where is, no warranty as to condition, conveyed by a quitclaim deed, the weakest deed that exists, transferring only whatever interest the government happens to have. You're bidding on a structure you can't fully inspect beforehand, with no recourse if what's inside is worse than the listing photos. Here's the part that doesn't show up in the auction listing, and it's the actual reason the government structures these sales this way. When you win a lighthouse at auction, you don't actually acquire the light. If the beacon still functions as an active aid to navigation, the deed comes bundled with a permanent easement, giving the Coast Guard the unrestricted right to keep, access, service, maintain, operate, repair, relocate, or replace that equipment whenever it needs to, forever, regardless of who holds the deed. You can own every square foot of the tower, and still be legally required to let a federal agency let itself in to work on the one component the whole structure was built around. You're the landlord, the Coast Guard is a tenant that never leaves and never pays rent, and you're still covering the mortgage on the building. Layered on top is a second restriction, pulling the opposite direction, a historic covenant baked into the deed, requiring upkeep to the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. Any plan to alter or replace a distinctive material or feature needs approval from the National Park Service or the State Historic Preservation Office first, on a structure sold with no warranty as to its condition in the first place. And what you're inheriting isn't cosmetic. Take Harbor of Refuge Light, a Coast Guard-owned lighthouse in Delaware Bay. The breakwater underneath it has been eroding for years, stone tumbling into a scour hole, roughly 140 feet deep. The government's own estimate to repair that structure in place runs $90 million to $120 million. Relocating it instead is estimated at $4 million to $6 million, the cheaper option. That lighthouse is still federally owned, specifically because no one else would take on a liability that size. The ones the government does let go are the ones whose bill hasn't gotten that catastrophic yet, but the same erosion is working on every one of them. You're buying a spot in line for a repair bill. The government already knows it's coming. On a schedule, nobody can promise you in advance. None of this is hypothetical. It's Graves Light's actual history, and Graves Light is the record holder, the best funded, most successful private lighthouse purchase the program has ever produced. Boston businessman Dave Waller won the federal auction for Graves Light in September 2013 with a bid of $933,888 after the price started at just $26,000. He planned on spending, in his own words, in the low six figures, finishing the restoration. He ran out of money roughly a year in. In 2016, he brought on a partner, a local businessman named Bobby Sager, who matched Waller's original $1 million commitment to keep the work going. Combined, the two men had put close to $2 million into a structure that had cost under $1 million to buy. It still wasn't finished. It took until August 2023, almost exactly 10 years after the auction, for the Wallers and Sager to finally install a reconstructed first-order Fresnel lens, the giant, multi-ton glass apparatus that gives a lighthouse its beam, the first one to sit in that tower since 1976. 10 years of restoration on the single most successful private lighthouse purchase in the program's history, run by an owner with the resources to bring in a second millionaire when his own money ran out. And that's before the part that had nothing to do with construction at all. In 2019, the town of Hull, Massachusetts sent Waller a property tax bill, a few $1,000s a year, small money next to everything else. But the town didn't stop there. When Waller pushed back, arguing the lighthouse sat on federal land outside any town's jurisdiction, Hull went to court and asked the judge to order him to stop renovating the lighthouse entirely or pay a penalty of $25,000 per day until he did. The dispute dragged on for years. It wasn't until August 2023, the same month the Fresnel lens finally went in, that a Massachusetts land court judge ruled that Graves Light doesn't actually fall within the town of Hull's jurisdiction at all, and Waller owed the town nothing. A decade of construction, a legal fight over which government even had a claim on the ground the tower sits on, and a threatened penalty larger than most people's annual salary for every single day it went unresolved. All of it happening to the buyer who had the fewest problems of anyone who's ever done this. Build the model, and the swing is almost entirely weather and legal exposure, not anything you actually run day to day. On the revenue side, the realistic play for most private lighthouse owners isn't living there full time, it's renting out the keeper's quarters. Comparable lighthouse-adjacent vacation rentals run the country. Give a sense of the range. A keeper's house on Puget Sound rents for around $285 a night. A lighthouse property in Sitka goes for about $553 a night for 8 guests. A larger keeper's house on the Chesapeake rents for roughly $650 a night for 16 or more. Those are mostly non-profit run operations next to their lighthouses rather than guaranteed income for every private owner, but they set the ceiling, even booked solid, A keeper's quarters rental is tourism income, seasonal and weather dependent, not the kind of steady cash flow that reliably outruns a 1 to 4% of restoration cost annual maintenance bill on a structure that can run into 7 figures to restore in the first place. A good year looks like this. The Beacon and Foghorn need nothing beyond routine Coast Guard servicing under the easement. The Historic Preservation Office signs off quickly on whatever small repair came up. The rental calendar stays full through the summer season, and no named storm makes landfall close enough to touch the breakwater underneath you. Ordinary maintenance gets paid for out of rental income, with a little left over. A bad year looks like Harbor of Refuge's erosion math showing up on your own structure instead of someone else's. A scour hole opening under a seawall. A storm surge undermining a foundation that stood for 100 years, but was never designed for today's storm frequency. And now you're facing a repair estimate with 6 or 7 zeros on a property that's earning a few $100s a night, when the weather even allows guests out to it. The rental income that covered a good year's maintenance doesn't come close to covering a bad year's structural bill. The historic covenant means you can't just patch it however's cheapest, and unlike a house on dry land, there's no simply walking away from a mortgage. You own a piece of eroding coastline the government already decided wasn't worth fixing itself. What you're actually applying for on that federal auction site was never a lighthouse. It's a maintenance contract with the United States Coast Guard, secured by a 100-year-old tower the government has already priced out of its own budget, sold to you with no warranty, no guaranteed condition, and a legal obligation to fix whatever's wrong with it exactly the way it looked the day the government decided it was someone else's problem now.